Hello everyone, and welcome to our second part of how to install VMLogix LabManager. We ended the previous video by installing and configuring the database with the VMLogix LabManager, and the last and final part of setting up LabManager will be to install the VMAgent that will communicate, in this case, with the vCenter server, and adding the storage in which LabManager will scan to detect any resources it can use, such as virtual machine templates and media ISOs files that can be mounted as virtual CD. So let's start by installing the VMAgent. I switched to my LabManager VMAgent server I've defined. It's a Windows 2003 server, and the VMAgent component is located on the LabManager server. So all we need to do is log in into the LabManager server. I'm going to log in as administrator and browse to the installers page. You won't see it, so you need to expand the UI and click over here. And you note there is a VMAgent section. You just download the Windows installer locally to the machine and execute it once downloaded. So we're going to run the installer immediately. And follow the setup process. Very simple. And basically, once the VMAgent is ready to be installed, you're prompted again with to install the VMAgent as application, again, which someone needs to log into the system, or install it as a service. In this demo, we're going to install it as an application, but of course, in production deployment, it's recommended to install it as a service. And I will start the installation process and wait for it to complete. So the installation process is done. I'm going to launch the VMAgent and start configuring it. So you'll see that launching the VMAgent will present an icon. But again, if the agent is installed as a service, you will not see the icon after you start the service. So we need to access this URL, which is http://127.0.0.1 or localhost column 35110. That's the page for the agent. When you're accessing the VMAgent for the first time, you will be required to define a password. So again, with all the other passwords that you use with VMLogix, we recommend to write them down and keep it in a safe place in case you need to access the VMAgent again. However, the VMAgent does not require maintenance. Once you define it, it runs by itself from this point. Accessing the VMAgent for the first time, you'll be prompted to define host setting. Basically, it's definition of the virtualization platform you're using. You can see we provide multiple options depending on the flavors you're going to use. In this case, we're using VMware vCenter. So the first field is the display name. I'm going to give it very simple display name, and I'm going to call it VMAgent actually, and provide the IP of my vCenter vSphere. So you can see here I have my client connected to my vCenter. This is the IP I will need to enter, of course, with the credentials I'm using. Please make sure to check our knowledge base for exactly which user requirements and rights we require when we connect to vCenter or ESX. So I'm going to start by configuring my VMAgent. Use the administrator password. And leave the defaults on fetch thumbnail and defaults. And now LabManager will validate the information. If approved, it will switch into this screen, and LabManager will start validating and configuring the VMAgent to work against the vSphere, and then I will require to do final setup. Now I'm prompted to choose the vCenter objects that will be tied into LabManager. So if I open again my LabManager, my vCenter client, you'll see that the entire structure will be represented in VMLogix LabManager VMAgent. Let's start configuring it. I'll go from the LMDC into the LabManager cluster and then select a specific resource pool. We're starting with the data center. I'll select that, and then this is the lab I have. I created in advance for LabManager. We contain my cluster. And then I can select my resource pool. Resources is the default if you don't have any resource defined on your cluster, but I have defined a specific resource pool in my setup. It's important to note that Lab Manager can be tied into multiple resource pool on the same vCenter or different vCenters, but you need to have a dedicated VMAgent for each vCenter. And of course, VMAgent will require its own Windows instance to do that. You cannot run multiple VMAgent on the same server. And I click Save. And of course, now we're selecting the vSwitch. The vSwitch setting is where Lab Manager will create the network once it's going to create cross-host fencing, leveraging the VLAN setting. This is a very detailed information, but if you want more information, please contact our support or look in our documentation on more explanation how it's going to be created. I'm going to click Save. And now I need to define the discovery settings. This is in case UDP broadcast will not work. For example, you have firewalls or NAT devices in your network that will be blocked the agent UDP broadcast when you look for a Lab Manager server. So I'm going to try the default option. We recommend to do that to ensure everything works. And all I need to do is define the IP of my Lab Manager server. Very important, the Lab Manager server IP. And I click Save. Once it's configured, you can see immediately the agent discovered the Lab Manager server. And if I click on the VMAgent status, you'll note that it discovered the server, checking the status, and it's not registered. And this is the final step where I need to access the Lab Manager and register this VMAgent into the Lab Manager server. Okay, so let me start by accessing to the Lab Manager server and register the VMAgent. So the VMAgent will be located under the Hosts tab. So I'm going to click on it, and you can see the message there are unregistered hosts. Clicking on it will present the currently unregistered VM agents available. For example, if I had multiple, I would see their display name. This is the display name I selected. I can check it, and now I can add it. But before I do that, just a quick explanation what you see here. This is the VLAN tag range. It's basically a pool of VLAN IDs that Lab Manager will be able to use once you deploy IP zone jobs across multiple hosts. So of course, this can be modified and apply to the Lab Manager, and once you select that, you'll be able to apply jobs with VLAN IDs. Please ensure to consult your IT department before selecting the range to ensure you're not conflicting with any existing ones. And clicking Add, and the VMAgent will be added to the Lab Manager. It's not fully registered until it will turn from red to gray. So you can click on the right on the Reload button and wait until it turns into gray. As you can see, the Lab Manager was able to discover the VMAgent, and everything looks good. If I click on the VMAgent, I can see the host I have. Right now, as I showed you, I have only a single host on this server. And Lab Manager also report there are some machines that are not associated with Lab Manager. I have some VMs that I ran on there on my vCenter. Now the last step on the installation is to add my storage, my ESX storage. So if I have a shared storage between multiple servers in my cluster, this is the place we're going to add it. So I'm going to click Add and add my storage. So in this situation, I'm going to add my iSCSI storage. So let me load my vCenter client, and you'll see this is the storage data store I'm about to add to Lab Manager. This is where my machine templates and ISO files will be located. So if I'll open it, you'll see all the ISO folder with my ISO files and the VMs I created in advance to use as a template. And now all I need to do is add this storage into Lab Manager. So I'm going to launch Lab Manager, give it a display name, and follow the format mentioned in the product. So usually if you want to avoid issues, just copy it. Make sure not to copy it with the extra signs, and I'm going to delete and use the same format I have in my vCenter. So case sensitive. So I'm going to use iSCSI share as the name of the storage and click Save to start the process. Now we're going to let a couple minutes for the setup to complete, and once I'll have the rescanner showing up, I know my installation complete. So just let it a couple of minutes to rescan the storage. It varies, depends on the storage size. And here we go. As you can see, this is a storage that was successfully detected by LabManager, and I have the rescan button available, so every time I add more VMs or place new ISO files, it's recommended to click on the rescan and initiate the scan process so LabManager can detect new resources on the storage. So as you can see, this was a quick overview of how to install VMLogix LabManager in under 20 minutes on your infrastructure. Hope you enjoyed this video showing how to install, and we have more videos available on our channel, on YouTube and our website on how to deploy configuration, use IP zone and automation. So please check